Are you one of those who believes that it was in fact the Bilderberg group who came up with the very idea of the European Union and a single currency?
I mean, the entire idea of European Union actually goes back before the Second World War. And the idea was, back in 1954, when Bilderberg was created, which was literally the European North American Alliance, aristocracy of purpose, as they like to call themselves, it was simply a way to deal with the, the challenge of the Soviet Union as the obvious enemy. In other words, they will not have the control of the world economy until both China and Russia are subjugated one way or another. Needless to say, these two nations, these two great nations, do not form part of Bilderberg, because Bilderberg is your old NATO alliance, and they're certainly doing their utmost, to destroy economically, militarily, spiritually, intellectually, both Russia and China. It's more difficult to do it in China, especially with the a very controlled regime in power. It's much easier to do it in Russia, although they certainly haven't been successful lately.
Do you think the Bilderbergers accept that we might be witnessing the demise of the euro?
Well, they certainly are not willing to accept it, and again, as I said, there are huge political will and huge political forces working within Europe to make sure that euro stays strong, and there's a lot of concern, obviously, that euro is losing so much ground against the dollar.
Tell me a bit more about the Bilderbergs' relationship with Russia.
Well, it's a hate-hate relationship in a sense. There's just simply a lot of mistrust. In China, you have a dictatorship, a communist dictatorship. In Russia, you have a semblance of democracy, so it's much easier to infiltrate certain organizations. As a matter of fact, in the 1990s, in the operation which then was called Barbarossa II, they used the NGOs, the American Aid, the International Monetary Fund, the George Soros Open Societies, to try to actually, infiltrate and destroy Russian society from within. Putin has proven to be a very apt negotiator, and he has out-negotiated both the Americans and Europeans. But again, what we're seeing right now, especially in geopolitical terms, is they're still at it. This new operation called Barbarossa III. The United States government is building 13 secret bases in Afghanistan as a forward push towards the eventual war against Russia, because that war is simply unavoidable. We're in the end game. The world financial system, is self-destructing as we're seeing it right now. So there's simply not enough time to reach any kind of, diplomatic solution, or to try to cajole the Russians into joining, becoming part of one world company limited, because both the Russians and Chinese simply very different people physically, as far as the Chinese are concerned, and mentally, intellectually, culturally, and historically than anything, related to Europe or the United States.
These are huge claims that you're making, 13 secret bases, bigger than the world's ever known, in Afghanistan. Where does your information come from?
Well, actually, the Russian government is one of my key sources in this particular respect, but there's actually been a series of, fabulous books written on the subject. One of them is Full Spectrum Dominance by William Englund, who Russia Today has interviewed many times, is one of the experts in the world of finance and also geopolitics, and he has amply documented these bases in his book Full Spectrum Dominance.
Are you a conspiracy theorist?
I know you can refer to me as a coincidence theorist if you want, but certainly not a conspiracy theorist, because I don't look like a conspiracy theorist. I don't think I talk like one. I don't smell like one, and certainly I know my history, which is one of the reasons why I was invited 3 days ago to speak at the European Parliament. I don't know too many conspiracy theorists, who get set foot, in the European Parliament, the mecca of bureaucratic control of Europe.
What was the objective of your meeting at the European Parliament?
The title of the speech was Bilderberg Towards One World Company Limited. I explained that it has nothing to do with the creation of one world government. Rather, it's the the control of the finances of the entire world, which is what basically unites all these people. And I explained that immortality has to do with survival of the human species, and how all of these elements form a very important part of what Bilderberg and their cohorts, because in the end, again, Bilderberg can't be that important because everybody knows about them now and everybody talks about them. But I'm talking about just the control of, be it shadow masters or people who control the world economics and finance, what their final objectives are. And these objectives pass through destroying nation-state republics and creating not one world government, but rather one world company limited, literally continents or groups of nations behind financial control, which is much more powerful than political control, as we're seeing, for example, in the case of Greece and soon to come other nations such as Spain.
Isn't it useful to have these kinds of powerful people meeting in private, away from the glare of the media?
It's very useful to have a group of people actually meet privately behind closed doors. A lot of political situations cannot be resolved any other way. However, when you understand, again, historically what these people are trying to do, when you understand, exactly where they're coming from and where they're going as far as the One World Company Limited, you ask yourself, do I want to be part not only of this particular way of understanding the world, because again it's a very small group of people controlling the interests of the rest of humanity, but again it's simply understanding that what they're doing, not that it's right or wrong, because there is no right or wrong in politics, it goes against the interests of 6.7 billion people on the planet.
How does the mechanism work? How quickly will what's decided at the Bilderberg meeting this year filter down and become part of the fabric of mainstream society as the European Union and the single currency has?
Well, it takes a little bit of time. I know in the press it's a question of minutes or at most days, but I'll give you an example. Back in 1992, when Bilderbergers met in Evian in France, they discussed for the first time the idea of one world army, under the control of the United Nations. Well, it took them 14 years to implement this and actually bring it out to the mainstream press. In 1992, they discussed it for the first time. In 1993, in Davos, it was brought out again as a subject, to be considered. And then again in 2006, when people were ready, to accept the idea of the United Nations Army, one army under the auspices of the United Nations, it became again the front page news. There's no conspiracy here. It makes a lot of sense. You're centralizing a lot of these institutions, but again you have to understand what they're doing. All these steps are going towards destroying the most important creation over the past 570 years since Louis XI in France and his first nation-state republic. They're destroying nation-state republics, because before in Europe we had countries, constitutions, flags, currencies, our monetary policies. Well, now we have nothing. We have a country which is called Spain, which is not, basically a subject to, to rules and regulations from Brussels. Well, President Zapatero, who went to the Bilderberg meeting and he was treated as a third-rate citizen. I mean, you may agree or disagree with his policies, but he's still the president of a, of a nation of Europe, not some tribal chief in Africa. We had currency which was called a peseta, which now is called the euro, which is not ours, it's somebody else's. A flag is now Spanish, it's the European flag with little, golden stars, and the constitution is obviously secondary to European constitutions, especially in times of crisis. And you know how easily crisis can be orchestrated, especially when you want to bring in or push through certain laws. So we've lost the right to be a country, and most importantly, we've lost the right to feed our citizens and control our monetary policy. And no nation state that has an obligation under natural law and general welfare historically that cannot feed its citizens or control its monetary policy can be called a nation-state republic. And again, be it European army, be it United Nations army, these are just passes, towards the destruction of nation-state republics and the creation of this. It's not the world currency, but it's certainly world company limited. So again, you can't talk about conspiracies. It's simply all these many coincidences which fit into a very easily discernible pattern.
Daniel Estulin, thank you very much.